Hello out there, and today I'm doing a comparison review of these two very cool Spyderco designs. And what we have up top is the Sage 2, and then beneath it we have the Mantra. And both of these knives, they share just a lot of things in common, a lot of characteristics, a lot of similarities in terms of design and also materials and where they're produced. But there are enough differences that it's definitely worth bringing them together to take a look at and really gauge what we would prefer and what things, personally speaking, I like more in one model than the other. Now, before we get into all that, there are a number of options that if you like either of these designs or just like the basic lines of the knife, you can get other knives that look a lot like this, maybe with different materials and different price points. Because one, talking about the price point, these two knives are both pretty darn expensive. Spyderco very recently took some pricing, so a lot of their prices increased significantly. And from Blade HQ prices right now, this Sage 2 goes at $201 and the Mantra is $188. So a significant little hike when it comes to what these two knives cost. And it definitely opens up the debate as to whether it's worth it and if it's worth it compared to some of the other knives in that series. And what I mean by that is what we have here is the Sage 5, which is one of my favorite knives, different materials, same steel that the Sage 2 has, cheaper price. And the Mantra also just like harkens back to the basic Delica design. So if you like the Delica, you'll probably really like the Mantra, but the Delica has a number of different variations at a different price point, different materials than the Mantra. But let's say, for the sake of this video, let's say that we are really into titanium and we want a titanium frame lock from Spyderco. Which one should we go with? Should we go with the Sage 2 or the Mantra? Well, let's just start by going over the ways that these two knives are really similar. And you're looking at it already. It's the titanium, it's the hardware, just the basic look. Looking at these knives from the lock side, you can see, there's just a ton of similarities. The hardware looks exactly the same. The clip is identical. When you move to look through the open frame construction, you can see that the actual standoffs are basically the same pieces. The thickness of the knives, very comparable as well. So these are both EDC knives and pretty classic looks. When we're going over the titanium, I think that the Sage 2 has a little bit smoother titanium than the Mantra, but that might just be on these two used models. I don't think that there's enough of a difference for it to really be even noteworthy, to be honest. But then once we get through all that, we start to see some changes and some differences, and these are certainly the things that I want to highlight today. So starting with the steel. So the Spyderco Sage series, it all uses S30V blade steel. And S30V for me is still a really excellent steel. At one point in the community, it seemed to be like the be-all end-all, the best steel that was out there. And now there's a whole bunch of super premium, trendy steels that are sort of taking more of the attention away from S30V. But to be honest with you guys, I'll never need anything more than S30V. It's a great steel, really corrosion resistant. I like using it a lot. It retains its edge really, really well, and Spyderco does a good job with it too. I have heard and seen in some cases that it can chip, but you want to know what? A lot of steels can chip. And I like the balance of, say, having a little bit extra edge retention and having to take care of it and be careful with it a little bit. So I don't mind that chippiness, and in the few cases where I have had a nick in an S30V blade, I've been able to sharpen it out and it's been just fine. So as a steel, I'm a really big fan of it. But then we have CPM M4 on the Mantra, and that's a different beast. And for me, I really like that. M4 is just extremely wear resistant. It's a very hard steel, a little bit difficult to sharpen, but it keeps its edge extremely well. I'd say noticeably longer than S30V, noticeably longer than most steels, to be honest with you. And for me, I think it has a pretty good appeal because there aren't that many production knives that use M4. So anytime I see a knife in M4 that I like and that's affordable, I definitely want it. And to be honest with you, that's what really drew me to getting the Mantra, was the opportunity to have M4 in a relatively affordable EDC knife. Now, I did get this one used, and it was cheaper, brand new. It was cheaper at the time that I bought it than it is now because those prices went up. But still relatively affordable, and yeah, just a very cool steel. Now, the drawback to this is that it is not corrosion resistant at all because it is not stainless. And so as I bring the blade a little bit closer, you'll be able to see there's just a lot of little spots all over the knife, just little rust spots where, there's just that lack of corrosion resistance. Definitely it jumps out at you. And most of these are from before I owned the knife, but I think that definitely just using this knife on a regular basis, this stuff could just happen. It'll patina, or you'll get some rust spots and you'll be able to clean them up and maintain them, or you won't, and they'll just be there. This knife does require a lot more maintenance than S30V, but I don't know, for me, I think it's worth it. For a lot of people, maybe you live in a humid environment, a wet environment, or just don't want to deal with having to oil and take care of your knives every time you carry them. Maybe this isn't the steel for you and it's a deal breaker just like that. Who knows? For me, like I said, I really, really like the appeal of M4 just because it isn't on that many models. Right, but then moving on back, let's take a look at ergonomics with these knives. Both of them are really comfortable in hand. The Sage series, the Sage 5 that I have had for quite a while, I've always liked the way that felt in hand. And with some knives that have a forward choil, I don't like using the knife any other way but with that forward choil. But with the Sage, it's always been okay to carry this way. So you do have multiple grip configurations. There is a little bit of a gap here, if you're not using that choil, but it's perfectly comfortable like this. The jimping is good, and it's exceptional for, detail work when you're choked up like this. So yeah, very good. The titanium isn't particularly slick, and the knife locks into the hand well enough that, you're not going to have any problems with it sliding around at all. Now, the Mantra, it doesn't have a forward choil. And so while you could choke up and use the front of the flipper tab for detail work, I don't know, it might be a little bit risky. I'd feel comfortable doing it for certain tasks, but not all of them. But the thing that's great about this is when you have your finger behind the flipper tab, it really, really locks the knife in. And with me and my medium to smaller hands, it is close to perfect. The jimping and the ramp as this slopes upward over the spider hole is perfect. And this knife is extremely comfortable, locks in really, really well. So I'd say ergonomically, this one is actually a little bit better than the Sage. And anyone who has a Delica actually can probably see the same thing. You have a Delica in your hand, just the way that it locks into your hand is excellent. And the Mantra is the same way, with just a little bit more of that lip from the flipper locking you in even tighter. So really good there. Really impressed. But then when we get to the construction of the frame, that's where there are a couple differences, and with the action as well. But let's talk about the construction first. On the Sage 2, we do not have any kind of stainless steel interface. So the titanium lock bar is actually contacting the tang of the knife directly, which is a little bit unusual and honestly unexpected at the price point that you're paying for this knife. Now, are there any negative effects of that? I haven't seen any. I got this knife used and it locked up perfectly every time. Doesn't really stick. So never had a problem with that. And you can see the way that it locks up still. So, everything about this knife is A-okay. Certainly I would prefer an interface or just something to keep the titanium from touching the back of the blade. But again, it works just fine, so I guess it's really not that big of a deal. But the Mantra does have a stainless steel interface, and it's excellent. Lockup is perfect on this knife too. So it's even smoother just to unlock and disengage than the Sage is. No real stick at all on the Sage, but this one is just a little bit better. And certainly you like that added step, I guess, the extra touch of quality just in the manufacturing process. Now, When it comes to opening and closing and how smooth the knife is, I think the Mantra, again, has the advantage when it comes to components because we have bronze washers on the Sage. And while it's a very smooth knife, it doesn't have bearings the way that the Mantra does. Now, the Sage, really good action, flicks open easily. See if I can spider flick it on camera. Yay, look at that, it worked. So just silky smooth on washers. But, not as good as, say, bearings could be. Now, a lot has been said about Spyderco bearings and the action on their flippers, and the way that this flips is fine. It's not really snappy, but it gets the job done. The detent's just fine. But personally, I prefer to open this knife with the spider hole. Let's see if I can flick this one. Yeah. So that's how I prefer to open the knife. It works out better that way. And yeah, I mean, the bearings are smooth, but they're not as smooth as a lot of other bearings that I'm used to. And I will get back to that, actually, talking about those bearings in just a little bit. So I think that even though on paper you would prefer bearings over, say, the washers that the Sage has, the action on them is so comparable that it's sort of a wash. And so at the end of the day, when we're looking at things, I think that there are certain ways where the Mantra might be better and certain ways that the Sage might be better. But ultimately, your choice when it comes to these two knives is really going to depend on the look of the knife and how you feel about the blade shape and then how you feel about the steel. Because I know a lot of people who maybe don't like S30V that much and would prefer M4, and a lot of people are the other way around, where they just want something stainless that's a lot easier to maintain. Looking at the blade shape, I think that I prefer the Sage blade shape. I'm just a really big fan of that. Have always liked that. Excuse me while I bump the camera. I have always liked that grind and just that really simple shape. But I'd say overall, just the way that it feels in the hand and just having that little bit of a more unique steel in an EDC, I'll definitely go with the Mantra. The extra $13 between this one being $201 and this one being $188, not going to be that big of a deal. So I think getting the knife that I want is the most important thing, and the fact that this one is a few bucks cheaper definitely wins the day for me. So my choice is the Mantra. As always, really want to hear from you about that. So what do you guys think when it comes to these two knives? Now, one last thing before I go, and I want to bring back the Sage 5 because a lot is happening when it comes to Spyderco and the way that they progress their models. And one of the things that Eric Lesser talked about at SHOT Show this past week was the way that they have improved and worked on their ball bearing system. And he was talking specifically about that because that is evident in a new Mantra. There's going to be a Mantra 3, which is coming out in 2018, and it is going to have the carbon fiber G10 laminate that the Sage 5 has, maybe slightly different, but the same basic premise. And it's going to be an S30V as well. So basically, if you really like the Mantra design, but you want to get it in essentially a Sage 5 with a compression lock too, so this Mantra will have a compression lock, then that's coming. And so I think that fact really makes this conversation even more interesting and something that'll be fun to follow up on as, I revisit this when that Mantra 3 comes out and I compare it to something like the Sage 5. And I'm really wondering what the price point will be because, like I said, $201 for the Sage 2, $188 for the Mantra, and the Sage 5 right now is $149. So what that Mantra 3 will be priced at and how it will be in terms of value and just how nice and crisp that action will be versus, the way that the bearings are on the M4 version here. Really something I'm looking forward to finding out. So anyway, guys, any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know down below. What I will do is I'll link to that Spyderco video from SHOT Show so you can check out what Eric Lesser was saying and yeah, get that information about the new Mantra as well. All right, guys, so thanks for watching. Take care. Hopefully you enjoyed the comparison video, but I will talk with you soon. Have a good one.